I'm Marta. I'm an artist development coordinator at BACKLIT Gallery. And this talk with Lucy Davies is a part of our Edition 26 exhibition, which is currently exhibited at BACKLIT Gallery. And the concept of the show is based on the idea of each artist presenting and exhibiting two works, one from the past and one more recent. And it's a great opportunity for artists to reflect on their own practice and perhaps show artwork that may be a bit forgotten, give it a bit more acknowledgement and kind of new place in their practice development. And yeah, Lucy's one of our exhibiting artist artists, and Lucy is a part of our Chaos Magic collective based at Backlit as well. She's an ecological artist and creative facilitator, and her practice investigates natural materials foraged from local and significant rural environments. She's fascinated in manipulating the natural form to break down at a macro or molecular level to regenerate into new possibilities. Lucy's work aims to remind her audience of the personal and environmental benefits of reconnecting to the natural world using local and Celtic folklore and their forgotten narratives, inviting her audience to confront their own sense of belonging. And currently, Lucy works as a freelance facilitator, producer, and content curator across schools, arts organisations, community spaces, and events in Nottinghamshire. And the structure of the talk will be that Lucy will do a 10-minute, 15-minute presentation. Then I'm going to ask some questions, and we'll also leave some space for you to ask questions if you have any. So if Lucy's ready, we can start with the presentation.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Brill.
Cool. Well, should we start by thanking everybody for joining this evening? Yeah, I hope the following makes sense. Okay. Just let me know if anything's pausing or anything at any point. But yeah, this is where to find me online. My website's currently going a bit of a remake as well, so it might not currently be live, but it will be very soon. So Martha's already introduced me, but I'll just briefly go over Hi, I'm Lucy Bronwen Davies. I'm an ecological artist and facilitator. My practice centers around working with natural and upcycled materials, exploring how they are broken down and transformed into new forms. Alongside that, I draw a lot from ancient craft, Welsh mythology, and folklore, using these as ways to reconnect with the ideas of land, history, and belonging. As well as my studio practice, I also work as a facilitator, sharing these processes with others through workshops and community-based projects. So previously, I was never going to go down an art route. In college, I studied really scientific A levels, and I was always planning to do ecology and conservation at university. And I changed my mind very late, and then very suddenly just decided to do art instead, which kind of followed from choosing somewhat my passion, but also what kind of felt like my true purpose at the time. However, my A levels still really heavily underpinned all of my research and art practice, as geology deepened my love for the natural world in ways we don't normally look or think about it, and still really shaped how I see materials and how they break down, change, and reform. And studying Buddhist philosophy at such a young age really shaped my whole approach to life, my perspective of it, and later on my art practice. So, my work references intrinsic connections and the interdependence of our natural world. Interacting with my local and rural environments, I explore themes of what it means to be at home in the world, to question my own connection to nature, as well as hopefully confronting my audience on their own sense of belonging. Back in my second year of university, I became solely process-led in attempts to detach myself from the work, learning to work with my materials instead of against them, to explore their properties, boundaries, and possibilities. enabling me to collaborate with my mediums to create a visual language by discovering order within natural chaos. At the time, I found this incredibly useful and quite liberating as an artist as I broke away from my own restrictions and expectations. My focus shifted from caring solely on an end product to embracing my mistakes and rediscovering the enjoyment in just simply making. This pushed my practice into one which became very mindful and intuitive. I often used it as a tool to focus on something, especially on days where I found myself struggling with emotions, memories, or just a very, very busy brain. In a lot of ways, it became a daily meditation practice. As this side of my practice developed, I let my intuition grow, allowing not just my materials to guide my work, but also my fascinations, ethics, and heritage. I investigate my heritage through research into Welsh mythology, Celtic history, and drawing inspiration from folk tales and forgotten narratives that speak to humanity's connection with the land. Find the interlinking values and relationships between our environments and those of other cultures and communities across space and time. I also love to forage, lots of various natural materials to later grind and mull into earth pigment inks and watercolors, to print or paint onto handmade paper, experimenting with various textures, dyes, and surfaces. My experimental approach enables me to engage and work with these materials, to learn about them, and to allow me to collaborate with them. I find this side of my practice really stimulating, as when you learn to source and make every element yourself, whether that's your surface, your pigment, or your mediums, every direction is endless with possibilities, which personally I find very exciting, as inspiration starts to come from everywhere. My daily walks, the kitchen cupboards, repurposing rubbish, and all those ingredients make something entirely new and different. And with time and practice, you then come to learn the way of new materials and how they cooperate or they don't. Working with their strange and often unexpected outcomes leads to new directions I would have never intended. I'm not sure I'll ever get bored of this way of working. I often get asked what's my main practice or what do I specialize in. I don't really have an answer, and I don't think I really ever want to. Working with natural materials means things can get moldy, or they fade, or they get too dry, or the pigments won't disperse, which, yeah, sometimes isn't ideal, especially days before an exhibition. But what I'd find more boring is for everything to work perfectly every time and to master a craft. For my work to be permanent, life is unexpected, always in flux, and about constantly learning and adapting to new encounters. Nearly every time I get over the initial frustration and learn to let go of what cannot be controlled, beautiful, weird, and curious things emerge. I've briefly touched on using intuition in my practice, but here's an early on example of how this started. I struggled with my mental health a lot during university. During these periods, I lost a lot of motivation to make any work, but when I did, these are the types of things that I made. Often watercolor, as I had a bunch I inherited from my grandma, and I guess using these paints she so recently used herself for many years helped me feel connected to her in a very specific way. With her in my mind, I started to work into leftover backgrounds, letting music and my grief determine my brushstrokes, both intuitively and conceptually. I found this to be a really healing way of processing and working through some of my grief at the time, as it helped me make sense of some of the thoughts and feelings I was experiencing. I painted these three on quite a difficult day as an act of meditation to help me relax and focus and remind myself of what is important. This translated into the line work. Like our natural world and lived experience, each line is dependent on another. Even though some may seem more isolated than others, all the marks exist as one. Nothing is truly alone or less independent than the next, but somehow connected. Hence the title, a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh's from Independent Arising. Following my intuitive watercolor process, and after randomly meeting Andrew Spicer at an entomology fair, which is insects, if people didn't know, are hearing how he took a single strain of algae in his garden pond into making a whole company that uses algae in different ways as a new sustainable kind of food making product called Algenuity, which then led me down a huge, fascinating world of research into algae and diatoms and their role in sustainable development and preservation. I love representing often the most overlooked, underrepresented, and underappreciated aspects of our natural world in my work, partially because I get so excited and curious by these vast ancient mechanisms that have powered such integral biologic cycles on Earth for much longer than we've been around, but also to hopefully spark interest in others, to widen their own understanding of just how interconnected our existence is, hopefully helping to grow their own ecological awareness. These algae-inspired forms were painted through a mindful and intuitive process. Their subtle connections and links throughout their colour scheme and forms reference the vast interdependency of our natural world. Like my fungi and insect work, I want to inform my viewers of the immense but often overlooked species that help to make up and sustain our ecosystems. My nests have been another branch, pun intended, of my practice, and I'm not entirely sure why I started making them. I started learning basketry at the time in my pursuit to learn ancient crafts that quickly became lost in our modern world and cultures. But I think partially out of my love for birds and bird watching as a child with my gramps. I also just um, love the simple sense of wonder that nests create, such as the joy of simply just looking at them in the trees and how they all start to pop out as the leaves drop in autumn, uncovering a hidden oasis of small, impermanent homes of another world from the previous spring. I really enjoyed the repetitive motions of basketry, but one day thought how incredible it was that birds with no hands and no ability to weave too can make such sturdy, complex vessels to call a home, so I started to try myself. Working with fallen branches or epicormic shoots, I soaked and then slowly, intuitively built up a shape in my mind. It felt as if I was completing a jigsaw. Each stick had a place to belong. Like basketry and like lino carving, this repetitive process felt meditative, and as all of the thoughts started to fall away while I made. I also loved the conceptual intentionality my nest brought into my exhibitions, referencing our shared interdependent existence and what it means to be at home, especially outside, as I want my work to confront my viewer on their own sense of belonging and remind them of our astonishing interconnected ecosystems, one of which we're just a mere strand of, to invite them to consider their place and responsibility we all have in preserving the land and the culture we've lost to urbanisation. Timothy Morton's Hyper Objects perfectly describes this and the responsibility that we all owe our planet in growing a better ecological awareness, which ends the idea that we are living in an environment, but rather that we are the environment. Bricks came along as a slight happy accident after comparisons made by my viewers between man and nature built homes in reference to my bricks and nests. I found they perfectly conveyed my intentionality of inviting my audience to confront their own sense of belonging, prompting what it means to be at home in the world. I also wanted to explore firing my own foraged clay, and bricks served as a perfect test to do this. I also wanted to play around with text in my work, minimally to help direct those who struggle to make the connections between my work and the themes it referenced. I did this by lettering some of my bricks, nodding to the traditional craftsmanship of local brickmaking, whilst embedding text as part of my work without it becoming too literal or explanatory. One example being to invite the viewer to question concepts such as greed. One bowl, one spoon is an Indigenous phrase representing the idea that we should respect our land and our community and not take more than what we need, because in doing so, we inevitably deprive others of the share. After university, I did to date 2 residencies, the first being the East Midlands Graduate Project at Surface in 2024. And I used this residency to embark on learning a new process. I'd never made watercolours myself before, so I wanted to trial this as I didn't have a printing press to hand at the time. And I experimented with those on my handmade paper with different textures and dyes and things included. It was also the first space since leaving university I had that enabled me to make larger handmade paper again, making my largest to date, which was Sleeping Stories of Wales on the right here. This artwork explored the intricate tapestry of life cycles as they interweave with various world cultures throughout history, with a focus on Welsh folktales. In these narratives, such as those featuring Afang and Puka, we see a profound understanding of land and its rhythms, reflecting the understanding symbiotic relationships between nature and humanity. By examining these cycles, we can uncover the universal themes of transformation, rebirth, and interconnectedness that resonate across different areas and cultures, ultimately revealing how stories and the natural world are deeply intertwined. The whale references its own mythical ritual and how a pod of sperm whales will sleep motionless, all vertically in the ocean together, in preparation for a mother to give birth to her calf. I also investigated my heritage through Welsh mythology and drawing from folk tales and forgotten narratives that speak to humanity's connection with the land. Finding these interlinking values and relationships of other cultures and communities across space and time. So Cosmic Dance, the one on the right, this served as a sort of visual celebration of this by finding the well-known Celtic symbols of the Tree of Life amongst the Metatron's cube, which is said to be one of the most powerful symbols in sacred geometry. It's believed to contain the 5 Platonic solids and represents the universal blueprint of creation, balance, and divine energy. In February 2025, I did a micro-residency at Harlem Art Space. This was a great opportunity to visit a variety of Neolithic sites, including caves, stone circles, and local significant places to Wirksworth for similar acts of gathering and rituals. Harbora was my first ever silk screen print, and this is also currently on exhibition at edition 26 at BACKLIT. I took it on originally a Pentax NG at the residency and then exposed it and kind of put it into Photoshop and was trying to learn how to bitmap it at a high enough frequency that I could try and get as much detail as possible on a 90T mesh screen. And then after exposing it onto the screen, I printed it with sediment that was local to the place. I love the added texture from the fine grains within the sediment, and I'm excited to see how I can develop this and the contextual references of the Neolithic rituals and traditions that took place at a significant place like Harborough rocks and caves. And intentionally, when I carved my, so I've done a huge series of medicinal mushrooms, which was predominantly my work at university. And when I was carving my Liberty Caps lino block, the fungi seemed to almost be growing into the lines, which was actually kind of pointed out to me. And when I saw it, I really, really loved this aspect of it. And it's kind of how I see the natural world and how it inhabits space in its relationship with it. So in my new series, I want to utilize not just the lino I leave uncarved, but the space carved away too. I want to reference the underlying structures that shape the natural world, systems of patterns, rhythms, and spatial organization that aren't immediately visible, but become evident through observation and other means. What appears as empty space is in fact part of a larger framework, one that governs how forms expand, divide, and coexist. From branching systems to the spacing of canopies, nature reveals an intuitive understanding of balance and efficiency, all growing in relation to one another. Space is not passive or empty, it is actively negotiated. I want my new series to utilize Lino to explore this interconnection framework where matter and space operate as one continuous field rather than as separate elements. Dorden Oil at Svenhoid is my first attempt of depicting this new visual language. And this is my newest piece that's also exhibited at edition 26. I printed it with hand ink I made using sediment from Lake Bala, a place in North Wales steeped in folklore and old Celtic legends. The title directly translates to return to my trees, but the Welsh proverb means a lot more than that. It also means to return to a sense of balance and a place of belonging and refuge. There was a grand, magnificent old twisting beech tree I countlessly returned to most of my life as a child, until it was cut down a couple of years ago, which was really, really sad. But it was here that I processed, healed, and returned to a calmer sense of balance within my body and mind. So the roots of Dodonal Atsfynhoid is inspired by this tree. And the interlaced pattern between areas both carved away and remaining reference how the tree inhabits space and how by no means are they separate. The tree also includes significant Celtic symbology, including the green man that my gramps had on his tree in the beautiful old garden, which really felt like magic. I hope this tree to blend will blend seemingly into the complex geometric structures of all planes seen and unseen. I did run into quite a few problems printing this though, so I'm gonna keep developing this work and keep trialing new methods. This is quite the sneak peek, as this is new work for Germinator, which is the upcoming show at Harlem Art Space, and is also a project I've been doing with them. It's kind of a mentorship project for myself and six other really incredible graduate artists, led by Christian Day, who's the curator of Harlem. And the images on the right here were some very rare digital work in progress of mine. So I don't really ever do anything digitally. Um, but I was playing around with potential exhibition poster ideas. The images I took of some of our insect eggs, all different species of phasmids, which are leaf and stick insects. The eggs themselves I always find really, really intriguing because they're like tiny little complex vessels, each as unique and beautiful as the insects that they become. Specifically, the endless combinations of colours and mottle patterns of the giant prickly stick insect, which are the eggs on the at the top there. So I chose to work with the form of an egg, in direct response to the exhibition title Germinator. The egg holds this quiet tension because it appears still and almost inert, but in reality, it's a site of constant sensitivity and potential. Its development is entirely relational to and dependent on shifts in temperature, humidity, and seasons, a form shaped not in isolation but through its environment, aware and connected to its surroundings, waiting patiently for just the right conditions. That felt very important, and not just because I find these strange little capsules so fascinating, but particularly important at this stage in my own practice since graduating, as my work has slowed due to lots of different life events, and for a long time that felt like stagnation. But in making this new series, I've started to reconsider that period as something closer to dormancy, an essential phase of internal development rather than absence. Like the egg, there is a sense of waiting, of conditions aligning. The work I'm producing now feels like the beginning of that shift, where ideas that I've been forming quietly are starting to take shape. This new series makes that transition not a sudden emergence, but the result of a slower, less visible process of growth. So this is the other work that I've made for Germinator. Neither are titled yet. There's still a work in progress, but this is a watercolor made just by using natural pigments and some other bits and bobs. Um, so this is development of more intuitive watercolor practice, similar to the algae works. And this is specifically inspired by a pupae of a giant peacock moth, specifically one that, well, the first one I've ever seen hatch with my own eyes, which was undescribably incredible. I just very, very slowly, a period of like half an hour or more, watched it kind of crawl out, which you can kind of see in the images there, and slowly inflate its wings. It was just mesmerizing and unexpectedly really significant, a quiet but undeniable moment of transformation happening in real time in front of me. The process of painting the moth's exoskeleton reflects the same sense of emergence, using only hand-wooled watercolors from earth pigments alongside clove oil, coffee, and sediment. I approached the surface intuitively, allowing reactions and separations and chance markings to take form. The clove oil in particular created dispersed spotting that echoed the moth's wings, as if the material itself was participating in the image. The work became as much about sensing as it was about seeing, holding traces of smells, textures, and residues. In relation to my own practice, this piece sits slightly beyond the state of dormancy, explored in the stick insect egg. As the egg reflected a period of waiting, this feels closer to a point of transition, where change is already in motion, even if it is not yet fully resolved. Rather than a finished state, this work marks a moment within that process, an unfolding that is still ongoing, but like the moth and like everything, there'll never be a true end or resolution, or I'd hope there won't, because that would be boring. And yes, these are some of the kind of extensions of my practice. Insects being quite a predominant one these days. They've played quite an integral part in my life and my practice over the past 5 years, informing both my works literally and symbolically. They appear as subjects, materials, and points of observation, but also as carriers of meaning. In one exhibition focused on Lepidoptera, I explored folklore surrounding moths, how they've historically been associated with bad omens and how they are shaped wider cultural perception that they're something negative or unsettling or even as pests. In contrast, butterflies are often seen as gentle and beautiful and desirable, even though they're both very, very similar. This contrast interests me. It reveals how selective our appreciation of nature can be, and how easily certain species become overlooked and misunderstood, creating a sense of separation between us and our environments. Do my work I aim to challenge that imbalance, drawing attention to the complexity, beauty, and importance of species that are often dismissed. Working closely with live insects has also become a key part of my practice. Observing them over time has deepened my understanding of their behaviors, rhythms, and environments, reinforcing the idea that even the smallest forms of life exist within highly sensitive and interconnected systems. This relationship doesn't stop with the studio. It naturally extends into how I engage with others, particularly through the workshops, where these same ideas can be shared more directly. So workshops are another huge extension of my practice these days. And while my artworks aims to encourage reflection on our relationship with the natural world, I'm aware that at this point in my career, at least, that's quite limited. So workshops have therefore become an important extension as they have allowed me to share these ideas in a more immediate, accessible, and interactive way. Many of my workshops are accompanied by my live insects, which consistently spark curiosity and engagement across all ages. They create a sense of joy and fascination, often shifting perceptions in real time. Activities such as creating insect sculptures, working with natural materials, or responding to direct observation allow participants to connect creatively and meaningfully with nature. At their core, these workshops are driven by the same intentions as my artwork, to encourage a deeper sense of connection to the natural world and to highlight how this connection can influence ecological awareness, affecting both personal well-being and everyday environmental choices. Beyond this, they also reflect a more personal aspect of my practice. Making art has always been a constant for me, a way to pause, process, or to find moments of focus. Through facilitation, I want to share these experiences with others, offering creative space not just for learning, but for reflection, enjoyment, expression, connection, and their mental well-being. In this way, my workshops don't sit separately from my practice. They're an extension of it and hopefully widen its impact beyond my artwork's primary audience. And this is the Curious Tower. If you've not seen it before, it's near St. Mary's Resting Ground, and it's a garden space cared for Chaos Magic, the collective I'm a part of at BACKLIT. It's an ongoing shared project that helps to extend my practice beyond individual making and into something more collaborative and site responsive. Alongside past and current members, we're gradually developing the space, and soon I hope, well, we will be planting lots of our first dye plants that have very kindly been donated to us by Primary. And those will be used within our work and potentially future workshops as well. This will open up opportunities to demonstrate how plants can be processed into pigments and materials, making the connection a lot more tangible. The space also allows me to develop more hands-on aspects of my practice, particularly in areas like basketry and cordage, which are things that I'd love to introduce into more complex workshops down the line. Alongside this, I'm beginning to explore the potential of growing and testing plant fibers for print for paper making, as currently I only work with recycled materials, but as part of my ongoing investigation into sustainable materials, experimenting with site-specific plant fibers feels like a natural progression. Like my practice, this space reflects a transitional shift in my processes, themes of work, and their wider extensions into the community art and collaboration. So I can't wait to see where they go next. Thank you. Listening to so many of my thoughts.
Thank you so much,
Have
Lucy. That
anybody
was,
got any questions?
yeah, sorry, I think I'm on a little bit of a lag. But thank you so much for sharing this. This was very rich, and it's great to, from Backlit's perspective, it's great to go more in depth into an artist practice and create space for that. So thank you so much for sharing this and also giving us a little bit of a view into the future and what you're working currently on. That's very interesting. And it really is like an online studio visit, because if we went to the studio, we would see those works in progress. So now we get to do that via screen. So that's a lot of fun to do. So thank you for sharing. And I think I'm going to ask people first whether they have any questions to engage people. And then if we don't, then we're going to move on to my questions. I would really love to hear from everyone that is in here whether they want to ask anything. You can either just unmute yourself or put a question in the chat. So I welcome questions.
Yeah, it's less of a question and more of just like an observation, but it's really interesting how like in depth your research is and how visually it's quite um like your work is like quite easy to connect with, like visually. And so I find that really interesting that there's such like deep research, and but on a kind of like an instant level, I get to engage with your work without having to necessarily know all of that deeper research first, and then kind of getting to like uncover it and understand it more. I find that really like yeah, really interesting. I think it's the kind of like the materiality of your work where it's like clearly everything's kind of made by you, and I think that like that kind of instant understanding of the material like draws you in on a different level. But yeah, really exciting practice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jazz. Anyone else wants to comment? You can also comment. You don't need to ask if you don't want to. Comments are also welcome. Mm, I will ask Lucy, in terms of the two works that you've chosen to show for the edition 26. I was curious whether seeing them kind of side by side, whether how was, yeah, getting to have that connection between them? Did anything surprise you in the dialogue between those two works, or was it like, okay, I can see there is like a clear evolution from one to another, or was there any kind of, yeah, moments of surprise, I guess? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, it was quite interesting actually because I hadn't seen them together side by side until I went to the opening night, and yeah, I think they worked really cohesively together, which was really nice. They share a lot of similar materials and language and color palette as well. And the imagery is quite closely linked as well. So there's a lot of cohesion there, but conceptually, they come from very different places. The earlier work is much more rooted in process, exploring what the material can do, whereas the more recent one carries more layers of meaning and intention behind it. I think what surprised me is that despite that shift, they still hold together in a way that they're both firsts, as one's being an exploration of new processes, and the other sits at a different point in my practice, um, but is kind of the first of a new ongoing development. So in a weird way, they're both first, but yeah, very different at the same time.
Mm, mm, mm. Thank you. And I can see Suzanne has a hand up.
Yeah, I was sorry, coughing to clear my throat. I was thinking of when the idea of using like natural materials, you said about the Harlem and sourcing some of the natural materials in the surroundings to create the pet. I was just thinking how that's preserved. Like, do you see that as your work would then exist for a particular period and it would then sort of, I don't know, like it has a particularly like your piece of work has a life expectancy, in terms of the materials and stuff you're using. I just thought because a lot of it is really naturally sourced, just in preservation and things.
Yeah, something I started to consider a lot when I first started making handmade paper, because I don't know how long it lasts. And to be honest, I couldn't put a date on it because the first some of the first pieces I made I still have. Um, but yeah, I quite like the side of that to my practice. I find it quite interesting that they are impermanent and that they eventually will return to the earth, which I think is great because they can, as a lot of artwork sadly can't, as it does contain a lot of things like plastics and things that will take a lot longer to break down. Um, I'm quite surprised by how some of them have stayed. Some of them have not. Some of them, depending on what I've used or if I've stored them quite poorly, have just kind of naturally faded, and some have got moldy over time. But I
But I
don't mind
think,
that either.
but I think also that's a really lovely sort of collaborative, that natural collaboration of where the work is then organic. So then it does change and shift with the environment it's within. And I think things like that are really, the idea that you're creating a work that then continues to live on through its own natural source, I think is a really lovely idea as well.
It's something I really want to explore more with sculptures. I'd love to kind of make nest or things similar and kind of leave them outside and actually see how those will change through seasons. May even be utilized by other things, I don't know. But yeah, I'd really like to explore that side. And yeah, I think it's quite a natural way of it helps me as well. I used to be quite attached and controlled, especially to my artwork. I could be very perfectionistic about things, but it's quite a practical way in just stopping me from becoming too attached because I can't, because they will inevitably destroy. And that's fine because that makes way and space in my mind, but also physically for new work, which is exciting. So yeah, I like it.
Thank you, Suzanne, for asking this. I had a similar question, which was this, but I also wanted to ask you, since you're incorporating a lot of kind of folk imagery and Celtic stories, I wanted to ask how do those stories kind of enter your work? Do you read books? Do you actually go places? Do you connect with people who kind of keep those traditions alive? I'm just curious about how those stories and those kind of, forgotten narratives and sometimes narratives that it's difficult to get to them first. How do they enter your work?
Mhm. Yeah, it's something that I'm still developing in my practice. as I'm really interested in incorporating more folklore and forgetting narratives in my work. But I don't want to make it too literal. So it's kind of, I'm still trying to find that balance as I want there to be enough suggestion that it sparks curiosity for others, to hopefully go away and explore those themes themselves, or at least be left with some kind of impression or confrontation or understanding. But I want my works to act as reminders for those, including myself, that are often all too consumed by constant stimulation of very fast-paced and digital, overwhelming worlds. And I hope that they kind of serve as a pause, similar to how things kind of used to be. Um, Times that were much simpler and intentional, and um, yeah, a time where things were a lot more aligned with storytelling and spirit and compassion and community. And I want those themes to kind of come through in my work and hopefully remind people of the respect that we used to have for the land. That's kind of the main theme I get from all of these folk tales, or at least the ones that a lot more aligned with like Welsh Celtic history. There's always some kind of demon or angel or creature that's kind of on nature's side. And yeah, they talk a lot about how there's two worlds and the underworld has all these hidden mysteries, and but a lot of it, like these underlying themes, they all just seem to be kind of quite similar, and they all just kind of, they're almost like when you're a child and there was always a moral behind a story, and they all just seem to be the same moral of if you treat nature badly, it's going to treat you badly. And to have that respect and yeah, to really kind of want to grow and learn with it and not kind of be so separate to it in our minds. Um, so yeah, and yeah, both nature and community, because I think a lot of them kind of speak to how we should treat each other. And I think some of those kind of things have been lost over time.
Thank you. I think, yeah, there is a lot of potential in exploring those stories. I just find it interesting considering there is just so many similarities to folk stories from my part of the world, which is Eastern Europe, about this idea of yes, nature will get you if you do it harm. And I think that can't be only for like European folklore and storytelling, but for others as well. That there is always this idea of like punishment or something will happen to you if you mistreat nature. If you do it harm, it will kind of find its way towards revenge. So that's an interesting kind of story that gets is repeated across different cultures. So there is a real potential here for connection for a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds as well, even though it's very kind of local and specific to you and your heritage. But I think that goes kind of beyond and has a potential for, yeah, larger kind of connection, I think.
I think that's
Um,
why I'm so interested, and I've kind of linked things from kind of growing up with Buddhism in my life as well, like very different geographically, but there's just so many overlapping themes. And then when I did research into those things, like those parallels were seen across so many different cultures and eras, completely different points in human history. Yet they all kind of carry such similar themes. And I think it does just come down to this connection that we used to have to the land that's kind of slowly getting lost through things like, constantly being on our phones or not kind of being connected with each other, and just the cycles and seasons of life. But yeah, I think we probably used to be a lot differently connected to things like that. And I think that's why kind of bringing back these folk tales, because even as a child, I feel like things were very different then, and there's not much time that's passed between then and now in the grand scheme of things. So I think, yeah, using folk tales and looking at these narratives is just so important to how we kind of have our perspective of everything, with still kind of the same like joy and magic as and those kind of sensations that you had as a child. Because yeah, I think sometimes adults were just too serious.
Thank you for this. I have one last question, and I wanted to ask you because you spoke about gathering different materials from different sites where you go, and then creating kind of pigments or paint out of that. And I wanted to ask how those different places inform different work and whether there are any differences that you noticed from gathering a material from there and then that changed what the work came out to be just because of the material was different. I'm just curious, yeah, about how those things kind of co-create the process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think place plays quite an integral role in my practice. More so since I've started to look into things like my heritage and folklore associated with that, or places that are kind of local to where I'm living now. And for years, I've collected bits of rocks and stones. Like even since as a small child, I think it was like really instinctive that I just always remember collecting stones everywhere I went. I don't really know why. I think a lot of kids probably did, but I was quite obsessed. I had like really large collections, which my mum wasn't so happy about. Um, but that's kind of translated into my practice. I just started either being drawn to specific colors, but also just significant places as a child, like if it was a holiday or visiting my grandparents or just like anywhere that had like meaning to me, I just wanted to collect a little rock memento. I don't know why it was always a rock, but I only grew to love rocks way more when I did geology at A level, because I discovered so many more kind of angles of what they can tell us, which I find really fascinating. Um, but yeah, I think that developed into my practice with the pigments and the materials that I use now. And using those natural pigments means that um, my work often has quite a limited palette, and that kind of is shaped by what's available to me. But I don't know. I think I find that quite interesting and quite special because I think a lot of these colours should be more celebrated these days. I think everything can be so oversaturated in all verses of life at the minute. Everything's just a lot. So I think sometimes it's quite easy to uh yeah, not appreciate the true beauty of just muted tones and the colours that we do see in nature, when they're often overpowered by other things. Um, and yeah, I think they naturally have just connected to the landscapes that they've come from. I really love how they've kind of acted as extensions of the place, as they hold like their color or even like their texture. When I look at closely, sometimes smells, and they kind of encapsulate that geological history within them. And I'd really love to explore the kind of ritual side to this in my work more going forward, as we've kind of collected these things as forms of rituals for thousands of years. And I think it'd be a really kind of lovely and intentional way to kind of explore that ritual side to it more in my practice. As I guess, in a sense, what I do now is a ritual within itself, but it would be nice to kind of explore those themes a little bit more and how they related to our past.
Thank you. I think I absolutely understand, and maybe that also relates to something that Jazz was saying earlier, that those kind of muted colors, I think this is what makes the practice and your artwork so like easy to access because those colors just surround us in natural kind of world and they do bring that kind of peace and harmony in your eyes and the kind of yeah existing by them. So maybe that's the kind of entry route for that access that Jazz was speaking about because they're just really pleasant for the eyes and they bring that peace of and calm. So maybe there is a link possibly there. Maybe. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was just going to say very briefly, I think that's why we actually open the show with your work, Lucy, because I felt like actually it was a really like calm introduction to the show. I felt like it was quite nice to be able to walk in and see something quite yeah, like delicate actually, just like calm and delicate, and yeah, kind of quite the opposite of yeah, really bright, loud artwork. Yeah, so I think it all kind of syncs up really with what we're talking about. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. It's interesting to see why you chose it at the start, but yeah, it makes sense. But I'm glad you guys got that sense as well.
Thank you, Jazz. And thank you, Lucy, and thank you everyone for coming and spending this afternoon, evening with us. We're going to wrap this now. And yeah, I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening, and we'll see you around in the studios. And thank you again, Lucy, for sharing so much about your practice. That was great. Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you
Thank you
very
so much
much.
for the time to listen.
You should-
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Marta.